Anyway, so today I just want to share with you some of the adventures on the road that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and share, right? So let me share my screen. All right. Okay. So this is just going to walk you through this last deployment I was in and tell you a little bit about what I do. As I mentioned, I'm a writer producer by trade. So what happens is I end up trying to get the best performance out of people on the screen or on film. And so that kind of made me uniquely qualified to do some of this work for SMA and some of the clients. When I first started, I was doing more video production, which is what I do for SMA and their clients as well. But what we found out through that exercise is that this orals training piece of it is also very useful. And as it turns out, the clients really seem to like it. So anyway, so this is one of the deployments I had. So let's get started. Okay, so SMA, of course, that's us. So this was the Orioles technical presentations and coaching for 2023. So this I've got deployed with Lockheed Martin. Again, you guys know who I am already, but let's just remind you just in case. A few younger days there, but anyway, so Luis Estrada, and that's some of the pictures in the background there. So if you've seen some of my presentations, one of the things that I always talk about is tell a good story. And again, where I got that from is actually there was a fellow that was the executive producer. He's passed away since then, but the original executive producer and creator of 60 Minutes. One of the things that they would always, journalist students and folks like that, everybody would ask him, what's the best advice that you can give me? And he would always tell them these 5 words: always tell a good story. And if you've ever seen 60 Minutes, it's arguably one of the best news magazines that's ever been on television. So with that said, that's kind of the basis for a lot of things that I talk about, because that's what you want to do. You want to tell a good story. So for the second year, Lockheed Martin has deployed SMA and myself to coach their team. And so what we do is basically, what we do is work with them to improve their skills in presentations. And so a lot of these folks don't do a lot of presentations, but they have to do them for their clients. So I was in Palmdale, California, Fort Worth, Texas, and Marietta, Georgia, all in about 2.5 weeks. Each participant had to prepare 2 presentations, one for work and another one for a hobby. And the reason for this is what we wanted to do is actually see their level of excitement and engagement for each one of the subjects. So what would happen is, and it was very interesting because we did about 35 trainings this time. We did about 40 the last year. And basically what happens is you could see the difference in their presentation when they're talking about something they're passionate about. And a lot of people at Lockheed Martin are passionate about their work, and it's great, and it shows. But when they talk about a hobby or some project they're working on and they give a presentation on it, you really see sort of the difference in their presentation. And what I try and sort of teach them and let them know is, remember that feeling. It's like Maya Angelou said, is how do you make people feel? Well, how do you feel when you're giving a presentation? How do you feel, if you're giving a presentation you're not, 100% sure on, but then when you're talking about, your remodel at your house or your new boat, all of a sudden you're super excited, right? And so it really shows. So we try to take those feelings and try to incorporate them, into what into your presentations. So the way it works is you present, we record, and we play back and feedback. So basically what we do is they usually put us in a conference room, and I have the videotape camera there, which, by the way, is very difficult to get into Lockheed Martin. And I'm sure most of the facilities we work with, but we were able to do that. So we got special permission. What I do is basically, once they have their presentation, they go ahead and present. So there's 2 presentations. They do the first one. The other thing that we do is there's a timing deal where basically each presentation should be 3 minutes. So at the 2-minute mark, I always give them a 1 minute. Why? Because one of the things that I learned is that a lot of people think 10 minutes or actually 2 minutes is 10 minutes, or 10 minutes is 2 minutes. it's amazing how people's kind of internal clock think that, longer times are shorter times. So it's amazing how people will do a 7 or 8, minute presentation thinking it's really 2 or 3 minutes. And so it goes by pretty quickly. So that's one of the things why we do that. And I'll tell you a story later about somebody that actually, there was an interesting reaction to that. Another thing that we talk about is communication. 10% of communication is what you see that is above the surface, only 10%, right? The rest of it is what's inside or going on in your background, in your brain. 90% is beneath the surface. Now, believe it or not, even though it's beneath the surface, people can see it, right? People can actually see if you're upset or you're emotional or insecure. So basically, a lot of these emotions, your verbal, your facial, your power, your mood, the emotions, the fear, the insecurities, all that really comes out, and you don't even know it's coming out. But it can manifest itself in, in nervousness, or if you're feeling kind of tired or just nervous. Well, if you've ever seen anybody present, you notice that. You notice, if they're nervous and those kinds of things. Also, the reason I put power in there is because a lot of times you have people presenting that either, lower or mid-level management positions. They get in a situation where they're presenting to powerful people, to generals, right, to the lieutenant colonels and those kind of folks. So that can be very intimidating for folks, because it'd be amazing how they build it up in their head as, I'm going to lose my job if this doesn't go well, which isn't necessarily true. But it is a real thing when presenting. So we talk about that with everybody as well. Then what we do is I really emphasize that we need to do is plan, prepare, practice, and perform. And a lot of them, ironically, someone didn't even do that for this particular exercise. It would walk in. We had one fella, and again, I'm not going to mention any names, but one fella didn't even do the exercise, but he did show up for the coaching. So what I told him is, just tell me a story, right? Because one of the things that we also talk about, we'll talk about it a little bit later as well, is that you're there to tell a story. And what is the story about? The story is about progress on the project. It's updates. It's about a new product. Those are all stories. So what I tell them is really frame it in that way. So you're telling a story, and really the PowerPoint, anything in the background, is just supporting that narrative, right? A lot of folks, what they do is they do the PowerPoint and then they try to talk to it. So that's why a lot of times what you see is people that put a lot of words up there. And so people just start reading the words and they're not listening to you. So I tell them, no, if you need the words or if you need the schematics or whatever it is you need up there, that's fine. But reveal it little by little and then tell your story. When you're telling the story, PowerPoint is actually supporting the story you're telling. So we talk about that as well. This is kind of almost a no-brainer, but interestingly enough, you got to know your subject. Now, a lot of people say, well, of course. But what I found out is that a lot of these folks actually get thrown into the deep end of the pool. They come in at 6 o'clock in the morning, and their boss tells them, you're giving a presentation on this at 11 o'clock. And they're not an expert on this. So a lot of them said, that happens a lot with our companies, that somebody needs a presentation. I guess the subject matters, the SME or the expert is not available. So you are now thrown in the situation where you got to learn fast. And one of the things that I also let them know that they should be sincere about it, be authentic about it. If you don't know something, don't tell them you don't know, just tell them you'll get the information and get back to them. Right. So those are the kind of things. So it's interesting how the things you find out as you start talking to people. This is the piece that I think is really important. You have to be authentic. You really have to be authentic. You have to be yourself, because that's what really becomes a powerful presentation, and with that authenticity comes this amazing level of excitement every time that you do a presentation, right? That you basically are, even if you don't know the subject matter that well, but you feel comfortable to not know everything and admit you not know everything, that becomes very powerful as well. So I just met so many people that, and this is one of the things that really, really is fun, is when people have an aha moment. So I'll give you a quick story about a fellow that came in. I think he was one of the last or close to the last people that was there back in, because I went to Palmdale first, then Fort Worth, and then Marietta, Georgia. And I think he was probably one of the last people. And this was a veteran of Lockheed Martin, veteran of the industry. And he came in and he was very nervous because he said he had just gotten kind of promoted. He was probably in his late 50s, kind of looking at retirement, in the next, 5-10 years or so. But one of the things that he came in, he was very high strung, and he was going 100 miles an hour, and he was, trying to explain things to me, and he was kind of getting confused as facts and data, and, and it was obvious where he needed help. And he said, I've got to give all these presentations. And a lot of times it just get mixed up in the information. Right. And it's gotten worse, he said. Over the last 10 years, just gotten worse. I used to be better at it, but now it's like, my mouth is going faster than my brain, and, and I get messed up. So I said, well, let's go ahead and do the presentations. Let's see how well you do. So we queued up the first presentation, and he started off 100 miles an hour, blah, 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 blah. And, he had the PowerPoint going, and it was, and he was kind of getting confused and looking back and all this. When I gave him the 1 minute mark, all of a sudden he completely changed. All of a sudden he just got depressed. He just stopped. So he finished, but he went from going 100 miles an hour to going about 20. Oh, okay, I'm done now. All right, well, this happened, that happened, okay, great, and then he kind of finished off. But what was interesting when that happened is at the end, when it seemed, when he just kind of slowed down, he just became him. He was very sincere all of a sudden. All of a sudden, it was him. And so when we stopped the recording and then we started talking, I said, well, what happened? The second I gave you the minute, you just completely changed. He said, it's because I knew I failed. I knew I was done. I knew that I messed it up. There was no hope for me. And he literally emotionally just shut down. And I told him, well, we started to discuss this, but I told him, you know what? What's funny is that before that 1 minute mark, you were going 100 miles an hour. You were all over the place. And then the second I did that, you calmed down. You stopped caring, because you're right. I stopped caring. But at the same time, then you became very articulate. You actually were talking about things like like an expert. You slowed down. I was able to understand you better. This is that feeling. That what you were feeling, that is your pace. That is where you should be when you're presenting, not, going 100 miles an hour trying to get 100 things done. That's your pace. And the look on his face that he had to comprehend that. So when we did the second version of it, he did it that way, and he did terrific. And he walked away going wow, I wouldn't have never figured that out. But I said, well, you weren't failing. You were actually just slowing down, and you don't need to worry about failing. He was so worried and so insecure and what do you call it when, it was just, he just got into his head. So one of the things I told him was, a friend of mine that's a sports guy, and he was one of these guys that actually, he's great at every sport. I don't know how he does it, but he's great at every sport. And one day I asked him, why are you good at so many sports? And what he would tell me was, because I slow down the ball in my head. And with that, I would go, oh, I understand what you're talking about. It still didn't work well for me, but it's still good advice, I think. Anyway, the other thing too, is we talked about it earlier, is connecting with you in your PowerPoint and the presentation. It's like what I tell them, it sounds a little bit silly sometimes, but you and the PowerPoint are one. So you and the PowerPoint are one. And this is what I try to say, because again, when you're telling that story, the PowerPoint is helping you tell the story. You're not trying to speak to the PowerPoint. And I think a lot of people try to speak with PowerPoint. No, develop that story first. You can tweak the PowerPoint. It's okay. You can go back and make adjustments and those kinds of things. Practice it. Practice the PowerPoint, practice the presentation, and then you'll be able to make those adjustments. Anyway, and so, a few people walked in. They were a little bit frustrated, They would come in and they go, oh, it's like the fellow I was telling you. So it went frustration. But what the nice part was, they went from that frustration, into some breakthroughs. And it was really, really nice to see. Some were bigger than others. I told you a really specific one, but there were some other ones that were really, really, like, oh yeah, if I do this and this, it really improves. And it's really the way I feel. So they kept trying to think in their head, how do I look? No, how do you feel? And you do it just by being authentic, just by being you, right? So you're being authentic, right? And at the end of the day, just tell a good story. And with that, is basically, in the most plainest of terms, is what makes great presentations. Just tell a good story. All right. Well, anyway, that's my presentation. Hopefully there's a little bit of a takeaway here for you. But that's the way that I approach orals training. And even in this industry that's very, very technical, it seems to really resonate with people. And hopefully it resonates with you as well.